The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in May 1883, and Delilah Turner knew before opening it that her life was about to change forever. She stood in the cramped boarding house room in Philadelphia, holding the thin paper with trembling fingers. Her aunt had died 3 weeks prior, leaving her alone in the world with $17 to her name and no prospects. The advertisement she had answered seemed too good to be true. A wealthy Colorado rancher needed a housekeeper, room and board included, wages of $20 a month. Delilah had sent her letter of inquiry 2 weeks ago, hardly daring to hope. Now the reply had come. She tore open the envelope and read the brief message. Position available. Travel expenses provided. Report to Ransom Drake, Silver Creek Ranch, 10 miles north of Telluride, Colorado. Wire arrival date. Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. She was actually going to do this. She was going to leave the only city she had ever known and travel across the country to work for a complete stranger. At 22 years old, she had never been farther west than Lancaster. The thought terrified her, but staying here terrified her more. Without her aunt's seamstress income, Delilah could not afford even this shabby room much longer. She sent the wire that afternoon, packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, and 3 days later boarded a train headed west. The journey took nearly a week, with stops and changes and long hours watching the landscape transform from crowded cities to endless plains to breathtaking mountains. Delilah pressed her face to the window as the train climbed higher into the Rockies, amazed by peaks that seemed to touch the sky. When she finally stepped off the train in Telluride, Colorado, her legs wobbled from days of travel. The town sprawled across a box canyon, surrounded on 3 sides by steep mountains that made her feel simultaneously insignificant and exhilarated. The air was thinner here, crisp and clean in a way that city air never was. The main street bustled with activity. Miners in dusty clothes, well-dressed merchants, women in bonnets carrying baskets, and cowboys on horseback. Delilah stood on the platform, clutching her bag, searching for whoever was supposed to meet her. The telegram had said someone would collect her at 2 o'clock. It was 2:30 now, and the platform was emptying. Anxiety crept up her spine. What if this was all some terrible mistake? What if nobody came? Then she heard boots on the wooden planks behind her. Miss Turner. She turned and found herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean, wearing dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. When he tilted his head up to meet her eyes, she caught her breath. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. A few days' worth of stubble covered his face, and his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. "Yes," she managed. "I'm Delilah Turner, Ransom Drake." His voice was deep, rough around the edges like he did not use it much. "I own Silver Creek Ranch. Welcome to Colorado." He did not smile, but his eyes were not unkind. He reached for her bag and she automatically pulled it back. "I can carry it. Suit yourself." He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "It's a bit of a ride, 10 miles up into the hills." Delilah followed him to the wagon, suddenly aware of how travel-stained and exhausted she must look. Her dress, her best one, was wrinkled and dusty. Her hair, which she had tried to keep neat, was falling out of its pins. She probably looked like a beggar. Ransom helped her up onto the wagon seat with one strong hand under her elbow, then swung himself up beside her. He took the reins and clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward. They left Telluride behind, following a rutted road that climbed into the mountains. For the first mile, neither of them spoke. Delilah was too overwhelmed by the scenery to make conversation. The mountains rose around them, covered in dark green pine trees. A stream rushed alongside the road, its water crystal clear. The sky overhead was so blue it almost hurt to look at. "First time out west?" Ransom finally asked. "Yes." Delilah cleared her throat. "First time anywhere, really. I've lived in Philadelphia my whole life." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "This is going to be quite different." "I'm prepared for hard work," she said quickly. "I kept house for my aunt for years. I can cook, clean, mend, do laundry. I'm not afraid of long hours." "I'm sure you are." His tone was neutral. After another stretch of silence, he added, "It's just me at the ranch. My father died 2 years ago, left me the whole spread. 2,000 acres, 300 head of cattle, a dozen horses. That sounds like a lot to manage alone. I've got 4 ranch hands who work the cattle. They bunk in the foreman's cabin, but the main house has been empty except for me since my father passed. I'm not much for housekeeping." He kept his eyes on the road. "I eat most of my meals cold out of cans. The house is a mess. I figured it was time to do something about it." Delilah nodded. "I'll do my best to make everything comfortable for you, Mr. Drake." "Ransom," he corrected. "We don't stand on formality out here." "Then you should call me Delilah." She thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost like a smile, but it disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. The road narrowed as they climbed higher. Delilah gripped the edge of the wagon seat, trying not to think about the steep drop-offs on one side. Ransom handled the horses with easy confidence, navigating turns that made her stomach flip. Finally, they crested a ridge, and he pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. "Silver Creek Ranch." Delilah looked down into a wide valley cradled between mountains. A creek sparkled in the afternoon sun, cutting through green meadows dotted with cattle. Near the creek stood a collection of buildings. A large 2-story house with a covered porch, a massive barn, several smaller outbuildings and corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney of a cabin set apart from the main house. "It's beautiful," Delilah breathed. Ransom looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "My grandfather built the house in 1861. My father expanded it. It's solid. Good place to weather any storm." They descended into the valley, and as they drew closer, Delilah could see the ranch in more detail. The house was built of logs, chinked and weathered, with glass windows and a solid door. The barn was enormous, its doors open to reveal stalls and hay storage. Horses grazed in one corral and chickens scratched in a yard near the house. Ransom pulled the wagon up to the front porch and set the brake. He jumped down and came around to help Delilah, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her down. She was a tall woman, but she barely came to his shoulder. When her feet touched the ground, he released her immediately and grabbed her bag. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you the house." The front door opened into a large main room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows looked out over the valley. The furniture was heavy and masculine. A leather sofa, sturdy chairs, a large table. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Newspapers were scattered across the table, along with dirty dishes and coffee cups. Muddy boot prints tracked across the wooden floor. "Like I said," Ransom said, sounding almost embarrassed, "it's a mess." Delilah set down her bag and looked around. "Nothing that cannot be fixed with some work." He showed her the rest of the first floor. A kitchen with a cast iron stove and a hand pump at the sink, a pantry that was nearly empty, and a small room off the kitchen that he said had been his mother's sewing room. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms. He pointed to one at the end of the hall. "That one's yours. It's got a good view of the mountains." He hesitated. My room's at the other end. You don't have to worry about me bothering you. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. I wasn't worried. Good. He opened the door to her room. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair. But it was clean, with fresh linens on the bed and curtains at the window. I had one of my men's wives come up and make the room ready. Figured you would want it decent at least. It's perfect, Delilah said honestly. The room was bigger than the one she had shared with her aunt, and the window looked out over the most spectacular view she had ever seen. Ransom nodded. I'll let you get settled. Come down when you're ready, and we can discuss what you will be doing. He left her alone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. She had done it. She had traveled across the country and arrived safely. This room was hers. This job was hers. She would make this work. After washing her face and hands in the basin and changing into a simpler work dress, Delilah went back downstairs. She found Ransom in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck again by how handsome he was, in a rough, weathered way that no Philadelphia gentleman could match. Let me, she said, moving to the stove. You hired me to do this, after all. He stepped back, and she set about properly preparing the coffee. While it brewed, she found some bread and jerky in the pantry and set out a simple meal. They sat at the kitchen table, and Ransom ate like he had not had a decent meal in days, which was probably true. Tell me about your day, Delilah said. What time do you wake up? When do you want meals? He wiped his mouth. I'm up at dawn. Usually grab something quick and head out to work the ranch with my men. We come back around noon for lunch, then work until dark. Suppers whenever that is. I can make sure you have hot meals ready, Delilah said, and I'll get the house in order. Is there a garden? There was before my mother died. That was 15 years ago. It's overgrown now. I can try to revive it if you would like fresh vegetables. That would be good. He looked at her directly, and she was caught by the intensity of his gaze. I appreciate you coming all this way, Delilah. I know it must have been difficult leaving everything you knew. I didn't have much to leave, she admitted. My parents died when I was young. My aunt raised me, but she passed last month. I needed a fresh start. Well, you have one here. He stood, picking up his hat. I need to check on the men and make sure everything's settled for the night. Make yourself at home. Whatever you need, just let me know. After he left, Delilah sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. The wind moved through the pines with a soft, rushing sound. She could hear the distant murmur of the creek. It was so different from the city noises she had grown up with. No rumble of carriages, no shouts of vendors, no constant press of humanity. She liked it. Over the next few days, Delilah threw herself into making the house a home. She cleaned every room from top to bottom, scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating rugs. She organized the kitchen, made lists of supplies they needed, and baked fresh bread that filled the house with a warmth it had been missing. She tackled the overgrown garden, pulling weeds and discovering that some herbs and a few stubborn vegetables had survived neglect. Ransom seemed surprised by her efficiency. He would come in for meals and find the table set with hot food, the house smelling of bread or stew or fresh coffee. He did not say much, but she caught him looking around with an expression that might have been satisfaction. On her 4th day at the ranch, Delilah was in the chicken coop collecting eggs when she heard voices. She stepped outside and saw Ransom talking with 4 men near the barn. They were all dressed in work clothes, weathered and dusty from a day's labor. Ransom gestured toward the house, and the men looked over. Delilah suddenly felt self-conscious in her simple dress and apron, her hair tied back with a scarf. Ransom walked over with one of the men, an older fellow with gray in his beard. "Delilah, this is Tom Garrett, my foreman." "Tom, this is Miss Turner, the new housekeeper." Tom touched his hat brim. "Pleased to meet you, miss. Smelled your cooking from the cabin. My wife's going to be jealous." Delilah smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Garrett. You're welcome to join us for meals anytime." "That's generous, but we do all right in our cabin." He glanced at Ransom. "Boss, we need to talk about moving the herd up to the summer pasture." "Come to the house after you wash up," Ransom said. "We will go over it." After Tom left, Ransom turned to Delilah. "I should have introduced you to the men sooner. They're good workers, all of them. You don't have to worry about them." "I wasn't worried," Delilah said. "Mr. Garrett seems kind. He's been with my family since I was a boy. He taught me everything about ranching." Ransom's expression softened slightly. "Without him, I would have lost this place when my father died. It must have been hard taking over so young. I was 28, old enough, but I had never run a ranch alone." He looked out over the valley, his jaw tight. "My father always meant to teach me more, but he died suddenly. Heart gave out while he was riding fence. By the time we found him, it was too late." Delilah touched his arm without thinking, a gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. For a moment, something passed between them, a connection that made her breath catch. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. "I should get cleaned up before Tom comes back." He walked toward the house, leaving Delilah standing in the yard with her basket of eggs and her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself not to be foolish. Ransom was her employer, nothing more. He had hired her to keep his house, not to be anything else to him. She needed this job, this place. She could not ruin it by developing inappropriate feelings for her boss. But over the following weeks, those feelings grew despite her best efforts to suppress them. She could not help but notice the way Ransom moved with easy grace despite his size, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face, the way he treated his animals and his men with respect and fairness. She learned that he was up before dawn every morning, working alongside his ranch hands rather than standing back and giving orders. She learned that he was teaching himself to read complicated books on animal husbandry and land management, determined to make the ranch thrive. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, usually late in the evening when they sat on the porch after supper, because that had become their routine. After the evening meal, after the dishes were washed and the house was settled, they would sit on the porch together and watch the sun set behind the mountains. At first, they sat in silence. Then they began to talk. Small things at first. Delilah told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her aunt's seamstress shop, about learning to read from newspapers left behind by customers. Ransom told her about the ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the time he and his father drove cattle to Denver and got caught in a blizzard. One evening in late June, as the sky turned pink and gold, Ransom said something that changed everything. "You know, this place hasn't felt like a home in a long time, not since my mother died. My father and we just existed here, worked and ate and slept. But now, with you here, it feels alive again." Delilah's hand stilled in her lap. "I'm glad I can make it comfortable for you." "It's more than comfortable." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Delilah, I need to be honest with you. When I sent for a housekeeper, I thought I just needed someone to cook and clean. But having you here has made me realize how empty my life was before. You've brought warmth and care to this place. You've made me remember what it's like to look forward to coming home at the end of the day." Her heart hammered. "Ransom, I don't understand what you're saying." He stood and walked to the porch railing, gripping it with both hands. "I'm saying this wrong. I'm not good with words." He was quiet for a long moment, then turned back to her. "When I look at you, I don't see my housekeeper. I see a woman who's strong and capable and kind. I see someone who makes me want to be better than I am. And I know I have no right to say any of this because you came here for a job, not for this, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." Delilah stood slowly, her legs shaking. "Feel what?" "That I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Delilah's mind whirled. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms. Part of her was terrified. This was her employer, the man who controlled her livelihood. If this went wrong, she would have nothing again. But when she looked at his face, she saw vulnerability there, real and raw. This was not a man taking advantage of his position. This was a man laying his heart bare and hoping she would not crush it. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've tried not to, but I do." Relief washed over his features. He crossed the porch in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. "Then I want to say something else, and you can think about it before you answer. You don't have to decide right now." "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I don't want you to be just the housekeeper. I want you to be the lady of this ranch, my wife, my partner in everything. I know it's fast. I know you barely know me, but I'm sure of what I feel, and I'm a man who knows his own mind." Delilah stared up at him, shocked. "You're proposing?" "Yes, if you will have me." Her mind raced. This was crazy. She had known him less than 2 months. She should say no, should insist they take more time, should be sensible and practical. But when had her life ever been practical? She had already crossed a continent on faith. She had already trusted that this man and this place would be good for her, and she had been right. "I will have you," she said, and watched joy break across his face like sunrise. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face against his chest. He was solid and warm, and she could hear his heart pounding as fast as hers. He rested his chin on top of her head, and they stood that way for a long time, holding each other as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. When he finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper as she responded. Delilah had been kissed before, fumbling attempts by boys in Philadelphia, but nothing like this. This was a kiss that promised everything, that sealed a future, that spoke of passion and partnership and forever. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ransom pressed his forehead to hers. "We will do this right. I'll take you into town tomorrow and we will see the preacher. I want everyone to know you're mine." "I want everyone to know you're mine too," Delilah said, making him laugh. They sat back down on the porch, but this time Ransom pulled her close against his side, his arm around her shoulders. They talked late into the night, making plans, sharing dreams. He told her about wanting to expand the ranch, about breeding better cattle, about building a legacy. She told him about wanting a real home, about children someday, about growing old somewhere beautiful. "You will have all of it," he promised. "Everything I have is yours." The next morning, Ransom hitched up the wagon and they rode into Telluride together. Delilah wore her best dress, and Ransom had shaved and put on clean clothes. They went straight to the church and found Reverend Samuel Harris, a kindly man in his 50s who had known Ransom since he was born. "Well now," the Reverend said, looking between them with a knowing smile. "I wondered when you would come calling, Ransom. This must be the young lady you hired from back east." "This is Delilah Turner," Ransom said, his hand firm at the small of her back. "And I'd like you to marry us." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "That's rather sudden, isn't it?" "Yes," Ransom said simply, "but I'm sure." Reverend Harris looked at Delilah. "And you, miss? You're sure as well?" Delilah thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The loneliness after her aunt's death, the desperate hope when she answered the advertisement, the long journey west, The first moment she saw Ransom waiting on the platform, the way he had looked at her on the porch last night like she was everything he had ever wanted. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Well then, I suppose we should make this official." The Reverend gestured for them to follow him into the church. "We'll need witnesses. Let me fetch my wife and the organist." 2 hours later, Delilah stood at the altar in her simple dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Harris had hastily gathered from her garden. Ransom stood beside her in his Sunday best, his hand warm and steady as it held hers. The Reverend spoke the traditional words, and they repeated their vows in voices that barely shook. When Reverend Harris pronounced them man and wife, Ransom kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Mrs. Harris dabbed at her own eyes, and even the Reverend looked moved. They signed the marriage certificate, Delilah carefully writing her new name, Delilah Drake. It looked right on the paper, felt right in her heart. Ransom took her to the general store afterward and insisted on buying her a proper wedding ring, a simple gold band that fit perfectly on her finger. Then he bought supplies for the ranch, introducing her to everyone they met as his wife, his pride evident in every word. "Never thought I would see the day," Tom Garrett's wife Martha said when they ran into her outside the mercantile. "Ransom Drake married. Your wife is lovely, Ransom." "You did well." "I know," Ransom said, smiling down at Delilah in a way that made her stomach flutter. They ate lunch at the hotel restaurant, a celebration meal of roast beef and potatoes and pie. Ransom held her hand across the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles, and Delilah felt like she was in a dream. Just yesterday she had been his housekeeper. Now she was his wife. The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter than the ride to town. They talked and laughed, easier with each other now that everything was settled. When they pulled into the yard, Ransom set the brake and turned to her. "I'm going to carry you over the threshold," he announced. "That's silly," Delilah said, but she was grinning. "It's tradition." He jumped down and came around to her side, sweeping her up into his arms before she could protest. She wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. He set her down gently in the main room, but he did not let her go. Instead, he kissed her again, deeper this time with a hunger that made her knees weak. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I know this was fast," he said quietly. "But I don't regret it, not for a second." "Neither do I," Delilah said, and she meant it with her whole heart. That night they made their marriage real in every way. Ransom was gentle with her, patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Delilah had been nervous, but his tenderness dissolved her fears. When she fell asleep in his arms afterward, she felt more at home than she ever had in her life. The summer passed in a blur of happiness. Delilah settled into her role as the rancher's wife, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She tended the garden, which flourished under her care. She cooked for Ransom and sometimes for the ranch hands when they needed extra help. She learned to ride a horse, with Ransom as her patient teacher, laughing when she wobbled in the saddle and cheering when she finally managed a full gallop across the meadow. But more than the tasks, she learned Ransom. She learned that he was quietest in the early morning, needing coffee before he could talk. She learned that he worried constantly about the ranch, about doing right by his father's legacy. She learned that he had a scar on his shoulder from where a bull had gored him when he was 18. She learned that he sang off-key when he thought no one was listening. She learned that he loved her with a fierce devotion that showed in every action, every glance, every word, and she loved him back just as fiercely. She loved the way he came in from a long day and sought her out first thing, pulling her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. She loved the way he listened when she talked about her day, really listened, asking questions and caring about the answers. She loved the way he held her at night, protective even in sleep. She loved watching him with the horses and cattle, gentle despite his size and strength. In August, a neighboring rancher tried to claim that part of Ransom's land was actually his, based on an old disputed boundary line. The man, Silas Ferguson, was known for trying to expand his property at others' expense. He showed up at the ranch with 3 of his men, all armed, demanding that Ransom concede the disputed section. Delilah was in the garden when she heard raised voices. She hurried to the front of the house and saw Ransom standing on the porch, Tom and the other ranch hands behind him. Ferguson and his men were on horseback, looking aggressive. "That land has been part of Silver Creek Ranch since my grandfather's time," Ransom said, his voice calm but firm. "I have the original deed to prove it." "Deeds can be wrong," Ferguson said. "My survey says different. Then your survey is wrong." Ransom crossed his arms. "I'm not going to argue about this, Ferguson. The land is mine. If you want to dispute it, take it to the land office in Telluride. But you're not setting foot on my property." Ferguson's eyes narrowed. "You think you're tough, Drake, because you're young and your father's gone." "I think I'm right," Ransom said. "And I think you should leave before this gets ugly." Ferguson's hand moved toward his gun and Delilah's heart stopped. But Tom stepped forward, his own rifle raised slightly. "You really want to do this, Silas," Tom said calmly. "Because we're ready if you are, but I don't think your wife would appreciate you coming home full of holes." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Ferguson spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over, Drake." "Yes, it is," Ransom called after him. "And if you come onto my land again without invitation, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing." After Ferguson and his men rode off, Delilah ran to Ransom. He pulled her close and she felt the tension in his body. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Ferguson's all bluster. "He tries this every few years with someone." Ransom stroked her hair. "But I meant what I said. I'll go to the land office tomorrow and make sure everything's recorded properly. I won't let anyone threaten what's ours." Delilah pulled back to look at him. "You said ours." "It is ours. Everything I have is yours now, Delilah. This ranch, this land, all of it." "You're my wife, my partner. I should have said that earlier." She kissed him, pouring all her love and pride into it. He kissed her back, then swept her up into his arms and carried her into the house, kicking the door shut behind them. True to his word, Ransom rode to Telluride the next day and came back with official confirmation that the disputed land was legally his. Ferguson never bothered them again. As autumn arrived, painting the aspen trees gold and orange, Delilah began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses were late, and she felt tired and slightly queasy in the mornings. She waited another week to be sure, then told Ransom one evening after supper. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I think we're going to have a baby." Ransom went very still. Then he turned to her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've missed my courses and I feel different. We should probably have the doctor confirm it, but yes, I think so." A grin spread across his face, wider than she had ever seen. "We're having a baby." He pulled her into his lap, holding her carefully like she might break. "Delilah, we're having a baby." She laughed at his joy, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Yes, we are, in the spring, I think. April or May." "A baby," he repeated like he could not quite believe it. Then he kissed her deep and sweet. "I love you so much, you know that, right? I love you more than anything." "I know," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too." The next weeks were a flurry of preparations. Ransom insisted on riding to Telluride to fetch the doctor, who confirmed that Delilah was indeed pregnant and perfectly healthy. Ransom immediately became overprotective, trying to stop her from doing any heavy work. Delilah had to firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. "Women have been having babies and working ranches since the beginning of time," she said, amused by his hovering. "I'm not going to break. I know, but I want to take care of you." He pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Both of you." As the days grew shorter and colder, they prepared the ranch for winter. The cattle were moved to lower pastures. Hay was stored in the barn. Wood was chopped and stacked. Delilah preserved vegetables from the garden and put up jams and pickles. The house was snug and warm, the stove always burning, filling the rooms with heat. They spent the long winter evenings together, talking and reading and planning for the baby. Ransom built a cradle in the workshop, carefully sanding and finishing the wood until it was smooth and beautiful. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. One particularly cold night in January, they lay in bed together, Ransom's hand resting on her stomach, which was just beginning to round. "What do you want?" he asked. "A boy or a girl?" "I don't care as long as the baby's healthy." Delilah covered his hand with hers. "What about you? Same. But if it's a boy, I want to name him after my father, Robert, if that's all right with you." "Robert Drake," Delilah said, testing the name. "I like it. And if it's a girl, you choose." "Rebecca, then, after my mother. Rebecca Drake." He smiled. "Either way, we'll be all right." The baby chose to arrive on a warm April afternoon, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Delilah had been hanging laundry when her water broke. Ransom was out checking fences with Tom, and Delilah stood in the yard, suddenly afraid. But Martha Garrett, who happened to be visiting, immediately took charge. She sent one of the ranch hands racing to fetch Ransom and the doctor, then helped Delilah into the house and up to the bedroom. "Don't you worry, dear," Martha said calmly. "I've helped birth more babies than I can count. You're going to be just fine." The labor was long and hard. Delilah had heard stories, but nothing prepared her for the reality of it. She gripped Martha's hand and tried to remember to breathe. When Ransom finally burst into the room, she had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. "I'm here," he said, taking her other hand. "I'm right here." "You should not be in here," Martha protested. "This is no place for a man." "I'm staying," Ransom said firmly. He looked at Delilah. "If that's what you want." "Yes," Delilah gasped between contractions. "Stay." So he stayed, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and whispering encouragement even when the pain got so bad she screamed. When the doctor finally arrived, he seemed surprised to find the husband in the room, but did not protest. The sun was setting when Delilah finally gave one last push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. The doctor held up a wriggling, red-faced infant. "It's a boy," he announced. "A healthy baby boy." Delilah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. Ransom was crying, tears streaming down his face as Martha cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket. Then she placed the tiny bundle in Delilah's arms. "Hello, Robert," Delilah whispered, looking down at her son's face. He had stopped crying and was staring up at her with unfocused eyes. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ransom sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Delilah, both of them gazing at their son. "He's beautiful," Ransom said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're beautiful. Thank you for him, for everything." Delilah leaned her head against Ransom's shoulder. "We made him together." They sat that way for a long time, the three of them, as the room grew dark and Martha quietly cleaned up. The doctor gave Delilah instructions for her recovery and left. Martha brought them food and fresh water, then tactfully retreated. Finally, Alone with his new family, Ransom carefully took his son in his arms. Robert was so small in his big hands, but Ransom held him with perfect confidence. He stood and walked to the window, showing the baby the valley below. "This is your home, Robert," he said softly. "Silver Creek Ranch. Someday it will be yours, son. But for now, you just need to grow strong and know that you're loved. Your mother and I love you more than anything in this world." Delilah watched them from the bed, her heart so full it hurt. This was her family. This was her home. A year ago, she had been alone and frightened in Philadelphia, answering an advertisement with no idea what awaited her. Now she was here, in this beautiful wild place, with a husband who adored her and a son who depended on her. She had expected to be a housekeeper only. But Ransom had said she would be the lady of this ranch, and he had kept his promise. She was not just his wife. She was his partner, his equal, his love. And now she was a mother. The days after Robert's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. But Ransom was there for all of it, changing diapers and walking the floor with a crying baby and never once complaining. He cut back his work hours so he could be close to the house, and when he was outside, he checked in constantly to see if they needed anything. "You're going to spoil us," Delilah told him one afternoon as he brought her fresh water and a plate of food she had not asked for. "Good," he said, kissing her forehead. "You both deserve to be spoiled." As spring turned to summer, Robert grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he clearly adored his father. Ransom would sit on the porch with his son, talking to him about the ranch, the mountains, the horses. Robert would stare up at his father's face, making little cooing sounds, and Ransom would melt. "I think he knows your voice already," Delilah said one evening, watching them together. "Of course he does. He's a smart boy." Ransom lifted Robert high in the air, making him giggle. "Aren't you, son? You're going to be smarter than your old man." Delilah laughed. "You're not old. You're 31. Feels old sometimes." But he was grinning as he brought Robert back down and cradled him against his chest. "Though having you two makes me feel young again." That summer was perhaps the happiest of Delilah's life. The ranch prospered. The cattle were healthy, the prices good. They hired another ranch hand to help with the increased workload. The garden produced abundantly, and Delilah spent long hours preserving food for the winter. Robert grew bigger and stronger, starting to sit up on his own, fascinated by everything around him. In the evenings, after Robert was asleep, Delilah and Ransom would sit on the porch as they always had, watching the sun set. But now they sat even closer, Ransom's arm always around her, her head on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked her one night. "More than I ever thought possible," Delilah said honestly. "Are you?" "Yes." He kissed the top of her head. "I think about that day I picked you up from the train station. You looked so small and scared, standing there with your one bag. I thought you would never last out here. I figured you would work for a few months, get homesick, and go back east." "Did you really think that?" "I did, and I was wrong about everything. You're the strongest person I know, Delilah. You made this place a home. You made me a better man. You gave me a son." He turned her face up to his. "I don't say it enough, but I love you. More today than yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than today." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too, so much." They kissed as the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over them since the beginning and would watch over them for all the years to come. The years passed quickly after that. Robert grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals. When he was 2, Delilah became pregnant again. This time she felt more prepared, knowing what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Rebecca as planned, arrived on a snowy December morning. She had Ransom's gray eyes and Delilah's dark hair, and her father fell in love with her instantly. "I have a daughter," he kept saying, holding her tiny form with wonder. "I never thought I would have a daughter." "And she's going to have you wrapped around her little finger," Delilah said, amused. She was right. As Rebecca grew, it became clear that while Ransom loved both his children equally, he was particularly soft when it came to his daughter. If she cried, he immediately swooped in to comfort her. When she started walking, he was always there to catch her when she fell. When she learned to talk, he listened to her chatter as if she were saying the most important things in the world. Robert, meanwhile, followed his father everywhere, learning about the ranch and the animals. By the time he was 5, he could already ride a horse with confidence and help with simple chores. He idolized Ransom, copying his walk and his mannerisms. Ransom taught him with patience and pride, passing on everything his own father had taught him. 2 years after Rebecca's birth, Delilah gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas after Tom Garrett. And 3 years after that, another daughter arrived, whom they named Sarah. The house that had once been silent and empty now rang with the sounds of children laughing, running, playing. Delilah was busy from morning to night, cooking, cleaning, teaching, loving. But she would not have traded it for anything. Ransom expanded the ranch over the years, buying up adjacent land when it became available, increasing their herd, improving their breeding stock. Silver Creek Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. But Ransom never forgot what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy the day, he came home for supper with his family. Every night, he tucked his children into bed and kissed his wife goodnight. Every Sunday, they went to church together in Telluride, the Drake family filling an entire pew. People in town often remarked on what a good match Ransom and Delilah were. "Never seen two people more suited," Martha Garrett would say. "It's like they were made for each other." And maybe they were. The city girl who answered an advertisement and the lonely rancher who sent for a housekeeper. The woman who expected to work and the man who said she would be the lady of his ranch. They had found each other against all odds, and they had built something beautiful. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ransom surprised Delilah with a gift. He led her outside after supper, while the older children watched the younger ones, and took her to a small rise overlooking the valley. There, he had built a gazebo, white-painted and beautiful, with a view of the mountains and the creek and everything they had built together. "I wanted to give you something special," he said, holding both her hands, "to thank you for 10 years of making me the happiest man alive." Delilah looked at the gazebo, then at her husband. He was 41 now, with a few lines around his eyes and some gray in his hair, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. And when he looked at her, his eyes still held the same love they had that first night on the porch when he told her he was falling for her. "You didn't have to build me anything," she said. "You've already given me everything." "Not everything. Not yet." He pulled her close. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give you everything you deserve." "Then I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to do the same for you," Delilah said. They kissed in the gazebo as the sun set, just as they had kissed on the porch all those years ago. And just as it had then, the kiss promised forever. The children grew up strong and healthy. Robert became a skilled rancher, working alongside his father from a young age. When he turned 21, Ransom made him a partner in the ranch, wanting him to have a stake in the family legacy. Rebecca grew into a beautiful young woman who loved horses as much as her father did. She became an expert rider, often helping her father and brother with the cattle. Thomas was quieter, more studious, but he loved the land as much as any of them. And Sarah, the baby, was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. Ransom and Delilah watched their children grow with pride and love. They navigated the challenges of parenthood together, united in their devotion to their family. When times were hard, they leaned on each other. When times were good, they celebrated together. As the years continued to pass, they added a fifth child to their family, another son named Daniel, born when Delilah was 38. The doctor warned them that this would likely be their last, and they accepted that with grace. 5 healthy children were more than they had ever dreamed of. Tom Garrett eventually retired, and Ransom hired a new foreman, but Tom and Martha stayed in their cabin on the ranch, family in all but blood. The original ranch hands moved on over the years, but new ones came, and the ranch continued to thrive. When Ransom was 50 and Delilah 42, they sat on the porch one evening much as they had in the early days of their marriage. The children were grown or nearly so. Robert was running most of the ranch operations now, preparing to take over completely someday. Rebecca was courting a young man from town, a teacher who shared her love of learning. Thomas was studying to be a veterinarian. Sarah was helping Delilah with the younger children and learning to manage the household. And Daniel, 12 years old, was still following his father around, asking endless questions. "We did well," Ransom said, looking out over the valley in the twilight. "We did," Delilah agreed, her hand in his. "You ever regret it? Leaving Philadelphia, coming here, marrying me so fast?" Delilah turned to look at him, this man who had been her husband for nearly 20 years, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. "Not for a single moment. Not ever." "Good." He squeezed her hand. "Because I can't imagine my life without you. I don't want to imagine it." "You won't have to," she said firmly. "We have years yet, decades, hopefully. Then let's make them count." He stood and pulled her to her feet, leading her to the middle of the porch. "Dance with me." "There's no music," she laughed. "Don't need any." And he wrapped his arms around her and swayed gently, humming off key, making her laugh. They danced in the twilight, surrounded by the mountains and the ranch and the life they had built, two people who had found each other against all odds and held on tight. The children came out to see what their parents were doing and found them dancing. Rebecca smiled and pulled her bow onto the porch, and they joined in. Thomas started singing, and Sarah laughed and grabbed Daniel, making him dance with her even though he protested. Robert stood with his arms crossed, grinning at his family, and eventually even he was pulled into the impromptu celebration. They danced until the stars came out, until they were all breathless and laughing. Then they went inside together, the whole family, and Delilah made hot chocolate while Ransom built up the fire. They sat together in the main room, talking and joking, and Delilah looked around at all of them and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what she had traveled across the country for, though she had not known it at the time. Not just a job or security, but a family. A real family, full of love and laughter and belonging. She had been so alone in Philadelphia, so lost. And now she was surrounded by people who loved her, who needed her, who made her life full and rich and meaningful. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Delilah stood at the window of her bedroom, looking out at the moonlit valley. Ransom came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," she said. "About how none of this would have happened if I had not answered that advertisement. If I had been too scared to take the chance." "I'm glad you were brave," Ransom said, resting his chin on her head. "I'm glad you came here. You saved me, Delilah. I was just going through the motions before you arrived. You gave me a reason to really live." "You saved me too," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "You saw me as more than I saw myself. You believed in me. You loved me when I did not think I was worthy of being loved. "You were always worthy," he said fiercely. "Always. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond if I can manage it." She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. After all these years, kissing him still made her heart race. After all this time, his touch still made her feel treasured and desired. They might be older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but their love had not faded. If anything, it had grown deeper, richer, more profound. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of true devotion. And afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Delilah thought about the telegram that had arrived all those years ago. That thin piece of paper that had changed everything. She had expected to be a housekeeper only. But Ransom had said she would be the lady of this ranch, and he had kept that promise every single day since. She was not just his wife. She was his partner in every sense, his equal, his love. They had built this life together, stone by stone, choice by choice, day by day. And they would continue to build it, for as long as they had. The years continued to flow like the creek that ran through their land, constant and life-giving. Robert married a kind young woman named Emily, and they built a house on the southern section of the ranch. They gave Ransom and Delilah 3 grandchildren, who delighted in visiting their grandparents and learning about the ranch. Rebecca married her teacher, and they moved to Denver but visited often, bringing their 2 children. Thomas became a veterinarian and opened a practice in Telluride, caring for the animals of the region. Sarah married a rancher from a neighboring spread, and they created a strong partnership much like her parents had. And Daniel, the youngest, eventually took over the day-to-day operations of Silver Creek Ranch, working alongside his older brother. Ransom and Delilah eased into the role of grandparents with joy. They still lived in the main house, still walked out to the gazebo to watch the sunsets, still danced on the porch when the mood struck them. But now, they had the leisure to enjoy their grandchildren, to pass on stories and wisdom, to watch the legacy they had built continue into the next generation. On their 30th wedding anniversary, all their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was filled with laughter and love, 3 generations of Drakes coming together. Delilah cooked for days, preparing all the favorite foods. Ransom made sure the ranch looked its best, proud to show his family what they had accomplished. At the dinner table, surrounded by everyone they loved, Robert stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to my parents who built all of this. Not just the ranch, though that's impressive enough, but a family. A real family built on love and respect and hard work. Dad, you taught me what it means to be a man of integrity. Mom, you taught me what it means to love unconditionally. Thank you both for everything." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Delilah felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. Ransom squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw that his eyes were wet too. "Thank you," Ransom said, his voice rough. "All of you. You're our greatest accomplishment. Delilah and I built this ranch together, but you are what makes it matter. You are our legacy." The celebration continued late into the night. When everyone finally left or retired to their rooms, Ransom and Delilah walked out to the gazebo one last time. The night was clear and cool, stars brilliant overhead. They sat on the bench Ransom had built into the structure, and he pulled her close. 30 years, he said wonderingly. "Feels like yesterday and forever all at once." "I know what you mean," Delilah said. She looked at the valley, silver in the moonlight. "I still remember the first time you showed me this place. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And now, it's even more beautiful because it's ours, because we made it a home. We did." He kissed her temple. I love you, Delilah Drake, just as much today as I did the day we married, more even. I love you too, Ransom, more than words can say. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted somewhere in the trees. The creek murmured its endless song. A horse nickered softly in the barn. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of love that had stood the test of time. As they grew older, they slowed down but never stopped. Ransom still rode out most days, checking on the cattle, talking with his sons and ranch hands. Delilah still tended her garden, still cooked Sunday dinners for whoever could make it, still kept the house running smoothly. They were in their 60s now, but they were healthy and active, grateful for each day they had together. When Ransom was 65, he finally agreed to hand over the ranch completely to Robert and Daniel. It's time, he told Delilah. They've been running things for years anyway. It's officially theirs now. But he did not retire completely. He still offered advice when asked, still helped with major decisions, still kept his hand in ranch operations. It was too much a part of him to give up entirely. Delilah, meanwhile, found joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She taught the girls to sew and cook and garden. She told the boys stories about their grandfather's adventures. She was the heart of the family, the one everyone came to when they needed comfort or wisdom. One spring evening, when Ransom was 68 and Delilah 60, they walked out to the gazebo as they had done thousands of times before. But this time, Ransom moved more slowly and Delilah noticed he was favoring his left side. "Are you all right?" she asked, concerned. "Just tired," he said, but his voice was strained. They sat down and he took a deep breath. "I'm getting old, Delilah. We both are," she said gently. "That's what happens when you live a long, full life." "I don't mind the getting old part," he said. "I just don't want to leave you." Fear clutched at her heart. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing specific, just thinking." He pulled her close. "I want you to know that if anything happens to me, you're going to be fine. The ranch is set up to provide for you. The children will take care of you. You won't be alone." "Ransom, stop it. You're scaring me." "I'm sorry." He kissed her forehead. "I don't mean to. I just want you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Everything good that's happened to me started the day you stepped off that train." "Everything good that's happened to me started that day too," Delilah said, her voice shaking. "And we have years yet. We're going to watch our great-grandchildren grow up. We're going to celebrate our 50th anniversary. We're going to grow old together just like we planned." "Yes," he agreed, holding her tight. "Yes, we are," and they did. The spell of worry passed, and they continued on, living their life together at the ranch they loved. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by family, a massive celebration that brought relatives from across Colorado. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, delighting in each new generation. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set, grateful for each day they had together. When they reached their 50th wedding anniversary, the celebration was smaller, more intimate. Ransom was 78 now, moving more slowly but still sharp-minded and devoted to his wife. Delilah was 70, her dark hair completely gray but her eyes still bright with love and life. They stood together in front of the fireplace in the main room, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around and renewed their vows. Reverend Harris had passed away years ago, but his successor, a young man named Pastor Wilson, led the ceremony. "Do you, Ransom Drake, still take this woman to be your wife?" he asked. "I do," Ransom said firmly, looking into Delilah's eyes. "Today and always." "And do you, Delilah Drake, still take this man to be your husband?" "I do," Delilah said, tears streaming down her face. "Today and always." "Then I declare that you are still and will always be husband and wife." They kissed to the cheers of their family, a kiss that held 50 years of love and devotion and partnership. When they pulled apart, everyone was crying. That night, lying in bed together, Ransom held Delilah close. 50 years, he marveled. Who would have thought that scared girl on the train platform and the lonely rancher would make it this far? I would have, Delilah said. I knew from the start that you were special, that we were special together. I love you, he said simply. More than life itself. I love you too, she whispered. Forever and always. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for 50 years, as they would continue to do for as long as they had. Ransom passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later at the age of 81. Delilah woke up next to him that morning and knew immediately that he was gone. She held his hand and cried, grieving for the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for over 50 years. The funeral was large, with people coming from all over Colorado to pay their respects. Ransom had been respected and loved, known for his integrity and fairness. But it was Delilah that people remembered most vividly, standing strong at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, saying goodbye to her beloved husband. After the funeral, as everyone gathered at the ranch, Delilah slipped away to the gazebo. She sat on the bench and looked out over the valley, remembering all the times she and Ransom had sat here together. So many sunsets watched, so many conversations shared, so many moments of simple togetherness. I miss you already, she said to the empty air. But I'm grateful, so grateful for every moment we had. You kept your promise, Ransom. You made me the lady of this ranch, and you loved me every single day. I hope I made you as happy as you made me. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked up to find Robert standing there. He was 56 now, with gray in his hair and his father's gray eyes. You did, Mom, he said gently. He told me all the time how lucky he was to have you. You made him happier than he ever thought possible. Delilah reached up and squeezed her son's hand. He made me happy too, so happy. I know. Robert sat beside her. What are you going to do now? I'm going to keep living, Delilah said. That's what he would want. I'm going to keep loving my family and tending my garden and watching the sunsets. I'm going to keep being the lady of this ranch, just like he said I would be. And that's exactly what she did. Delilah lived for another 12 years, surrounded by her ever-growing family. She watched great-great-grandchildren be born. She tended her garden until her hands could no longer grip the tools. She told stories about Ransom to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. She sat in the gazebo every evening, watching the sun set over the valley, feeling his presence beside her. When she finally passed away at the age of 85, peacefully in her sleep, just as Ransom had, her family laid her to rest beside her husband. The headstone read, Delilah Drake, 1861–1946. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, lady of Silver Creek Ranch. Their children made sure the ranch continued to thrive, honoring the legacy their parents had built. The gazebo became a special place for family gatherings, weddings, and quiet moments of reflection. And every generation that came after heard the story of how Ransom and Delilah met, how a city girl answered an advertisement and found not just a job, but a love that would span lifetimes. Silver Creek Ranch remained in the Drake family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they loved each other completely. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the breeze moved through the pines, people swore they could see two figures sitting in the gazebo, holding hands and watching the mountains turn gold in the dying light. The telegram had arrived on a Tuesday morning in May 1883, and Delilah Turner's life had changed forever. She had expected to be a housekeeper only. But Ransom Drake had said she would be the lady of this ranch, and together they had built something that would last for all time. A love story for the ages, set against the wild beauty of the Colorado mountains, proving that sometimes taking a leap of faith can lead to everything you ever dreamed of and more.